John and I are here at Bluestockings. The first time was 4 years ago. My book had just come out and I had gotten in touch with John to ask him whether he wanted to write about it for the KGB Lit magazine. And luckily he agreed. And 4 years later, here we are again. So my book is called Soliloquies of a Crosswalker. And it came out in 2011. And today I thought to read to you the poems in more or less of a chronological order, which I don't think I've ever done before. And the first poem I'll read to you is in the section of the book called But Nothing Else Happens. And it's a poem that I wrote when I was 20. I had just graduated college and I was traveling in Europe. And the poem is called Côte d'Azur, and it's the first poem in the book. There is a stone tower between two small towns on the Mediterranean. From atop, a girl is afraid of heights, another steps on glass, and a boy tells stories of the moon and sand ripples in some remote corner of the earth, but nothing else happens. And I thought tonight also to take the opportunity to read some poems which I usually don't read at poetry readings. And so the second poem that I'll read to you tonight was written when I was very young, in my very early 20s, maybe 19 even. I was living in New York and I was still a student. And I think I submitted it somewhere online and it was one of the first recognitions I received, and they published it on some obscure website. And I usually don't read it, and it's called Whipped Cream. I used to think I was a saint. That night we spoke in a car on the street. I was in your lap. You got hard, I played, and your brother smiled. Later, in that red place with beads and light, I ordered a cappuccino with whipped cream as I was telling you I was a saint. And by the time I was done, the whipped cream melted. I went back and forth all my life, really, between New York and Israel, but a lot as a child and then again in my early 20s. And this is a poem that I wrote in Haifa, where I was born. And it's called Mozart at the Bahai. Yesterday I walked along the Haifa promenade, an ancient port city, old people unhappy with homesickness, dead spouses, unwashable memories, as a middle-aged, well-dressed Russian immigrant plays Mozart on his keyboard. 3 stools await an audience, wild felines prowl, without a home, without a master, the Bahai temple at my feet, memories everywhere. And the last poem that I'll read to you from this early chapter is a very short poem, and it may be one of the earliest poems. And it's one that whenever I'm leaving Israel, usually driving on the way to the airport, and I always think of this poem. And it's called Haifa Tel Aviv Highway. The birds fly in the sky as the bus drives by, and everything that passes has meaning of the weeks and years that were. And the second chapter in the book is called And All She Does Is Smirk. And it may be the longest chapter in the book, and it contains love poems written about a love affair that ended eventually. And I'll also read to you the shorter poems, which I usually don't read and which are dear to me. And the reason that I don't read them is because I believe that they're meant to be read alone, silently, and not out loud. But nevertheless. And the first one is called Another Napkin. A girl and a boy diluted by anxiety. You like that? He asks on a snowflake clock, and all she does is smirk. And the second one was written in Brooklyn. I had moved into Bushwick for the first time, and I was living in a large loft with 2 cats. And when I first moved in, I wrote this poem. It's called Acrobats. In this strange place, the cats walk along white bricks about 6 meters long, which are piled below huge vertical windows of some old factory. Very urban. When I stare enough of 60 seconds or so, their silhouette becomes one-dimensional, like moving, agile cardboard cutouts, which for some reason reminds me of Paris in the 20s. My cats walk these 6 meters, stopping to smell or looking up in a meow. Every few steps they meet, have a quick greeting, and intercept each other like tightrope acrobats, tail up and swaying elegantly. They continue at this pace, walking, breaking the casual hellos. It is a circus act here in this crazy place we all 3 are newcomers to. The light is good, the stomach is satisfied, and the entertainment is top rate. I had a number of odd jobs my whole life really, but during this time as well. One of them was working at a movie theater. And it's funny that I had a few of these jobs, this one at the movie theater and later in Israel as a hotel receptionist, and although the jobs were very dull and I wasn't at all living up to my potential, the people that came and went gave way to a number of poems. So this one is also very short, and I can dedicate it to Eyal, and it's called My Favorite Poet. I'm working at the cinema reading your book when a guy says, "Light stuff," and I say, "It's not so bad." And he says, "I like him," and I say, "I love him." And the next one is one of the poems that I call maybe a drunken poem, and it's called Devious Semantics. Your green soul and purple anthills soar with the eagles before migration. You land in a northern state, stamp your devious feet everywhere on the 4th level of dust. You find a red trigger, ooze a clean pus into my dirty girl's soul. And the next poem, which I think is maybe the best one, for sure in the chapter, maybe even in the book, is called Gala. Eve once fed me an apple from her garden. Its name was Gala, and I was wearing large green mittens and dirty cream shoes, descending a long escalator in the city after Eden. Adam wasn't there, and we were both pregnant, smoking cigarettes without tar and drinking tall silver cans of Japanese beer after the night of the lunar eclipse. I think Adam was off somewhere reading about socialism and punk rock on the toilet, but we weren't sure. And then there was a power outage in the city a very long time ago. I think it was 2002 or something like that. And I wrote a poem called AC. There is a power outage in the city tonight. It smells like coals burning and the stars are more than ever. I can shower, flush the toilet, bite my nails, and sleep. But like all the milk and all the ice cream, it's too hot, as the flashlights keep flickering like searching helicopters. And soon they will shine the light on me writing this note, and my kitten perched on the AC, listening to the children's voices, yearning for play. My dear kitten, who is still alive today and 14 years old. And the next chapter in the book was when I went back to Israel after 20 years, and I moved around a lot. And this poem was written when I was living in Tel Aviv with 2 cats and 2 dogs on a rooftop in Florentine in an apartment the size of a closet with no air conditioning. And it's called 5767. My cat cuddles more on Saturdays, though she knows. Even the dogs aren't begging for a walk. They're content that there are no construction workers and horns honking and yelling and screaming of all kinds. The new year has landed us this silence and the first raindrops too, and everyone is sitting in some family living room. The only place open is the corner store on Abalbaner where we used to buy ice cream before or after our trips. Now it's my usual hangout. When I get enough energy, I'll make my way there for some stale pastries, bad coffee, and free internet service. On the way, there'll be the playing of a clarinet. Then I'll send you this poem, give the dogs a brushing, and find the sea from another direction. And one of the earlier poems that I wrote in this period was before I settled down in any home. I was roaming around the country a lot, and this one was written also in Haifa, my hometown. I don't think I've ever read it at a reading before, but it's also kind of one of my favorites. And it's called "My ups and downs are like that of a lazy man who walks outside and sees the moon. The security guard dangles his metal detector, bored to death. I go to use the restroom as a feline nurses my shirt, and when I return, there are chips scattered on the table, and the guard has stood up to shake his head at me. There has been some activity tonight." And this is also one that I wrote in Haifa. It's called Java. In a chic 24-hour cafe on the way to the beach, there is a sexy cashier, and buying some coffee is an old lady with a number still tattooed on her left forearm. Tel Aviv, 3:38. In a few hours I'm off to London and then to the city, except today there's still live music at the Boom Bar and tall glasses of Tuborg and camouflage trousers that if you please you can rip. And the taxi driver, which I always shotgun here, says, "My brother has an Irish wife who's really Catholic, but they seem to get along okay." To which I reply, "That's all that matters." And he says, "The trick is to bend down without it hurting." That's also the first time I ever read that poem out loud. And then I worked as a hotel receptionist on the banks of the Kinneret, the Lake of Galilee. Also a very dull job, but the Kinneret is surrounded by numerous holy sites, so it attracts a lot of Christian pilgrims. And this is a story about one of them. It's called Doris. The socket flares each time upon ejection, day or night. The pilgrims send postcards home via reception with words that Jesus and his disciples are still walking the banks of the lake. Then a Swiss gentleman approaches the counter with his perfect Hebrew and asks for whipped cream instead of a safe deposit box, and we smile together at his mistake. And van number 39 makes a trip to the fish restaurant to pick up Doris, who missed the sights today because of chest pains. She invites me for coffee on the promenade, and although I'm on duty, there's no hesitation. And we sit, and she tells me stories of Yeshua and his resurrection, and of the gentleman whose great aunt hid Jews in the war and spoke of nothing when the police arrived. And a cat climbs onto our laps as the sun begins to set and the fishermen walk past. She gives me her only copy of the Gospels as a gift and hopes she hasn't offended me. She believes it was fate that we met today. And later they gather at the bar to sing songs, and the whipped cream man plays guitar and his beautiful wife plays a wooden flute, and all the songs are sung in French and Hebrew. I have practiced my French today, typed from right to left, and told no one of the kitten who snuck inside for a rest on the couches. And then after many years and probably many homes, I ended up in Tel Aviv, and I met a girl, and I wrote 2 poems, of which I'll read you one. It's called Going Down. I remember undressing you in my small, empty bedroom in the middle of the night. I remember the calming sensation of being sober next to you that first time. It was summer and I was living in an industrial neighborhood, losing my virginity again at 29. I remember lying next to you and listening to your voice go on and on until we kissed. I remember smiling as I saw you pull off your panties with your feet and wrinkle your brow. I waited many years for a woman like you, and when you arrived, I touched all of you as if I'd always been there. And then came fall, and I moved into a smaller place on a street named after a Frenchman, and a week ago today, we had a marathon of sorts here. And since then, I haven't seen you. And the last poem I'll read today is called Soliloquies of the Crosswalker, like the book. And it's the last poem that I wrote before finally making it back to New York to bind my poetry. Soliloquies of a Crosswalker. There is a heat wave today, and it makes my thoughts even more unsteady. And from the look of me, one can tell I've had some action, so that the desperation is off for just a bit, and the meaningless storytelling on pause. And I am a bit high with the notion that perhaps, for a moment, I belong to the human race. So thank you for listening. Thanks for coming. Thanks to John. And thanks to